Hello, this is Dr. Kraus, and I want to do a brief intro to Jupyter Notebooks. Jupyter Notebooks are really powerful, especially if, like myself, you're someone who needs to blend talking about Python with talking about math, and also wants to include graphs and that kind of thing. They're just really powerful. But they're probably also, unlike most other ways of either thinking about documents or thinking about programming, how to blend those two things together is part of what makes Jupyter Notebooks really cool. I know that I've got another video about this on my channel, and there's probably going to be some overlap, but these are just the things that come to my mind as I'm starting a new semester where students are going to do a lot of work with Python and Jupyter Notebooks as the first things my students are going to need to know. So if you're a new Python programmer, hopefully this is helpful to you. So like I've already said, the reason I care about this is that Jupyter Notebooks are super powerful. They allow you to blend together live Python code with nicely formatted text, equations, images, and basically any HTML that you want to put in them is also a nice way to extend them. And they allow you to immediately see the results of any code that you are typing in. So super powerful. But one of the things that's really befuddling to some of my students, if I can use the word befuddling and sound like an old person, is that you can't just double click them. So if you happen to have, I'm going to make this example available, you've downloaded this thing, or you've downloaded, so I'm going to use Jupyter Notebooks for outlines in my classes. Somehow you've gotten your hands on a Jupyter Notebook and you need to know how to open it. And in most operating systems, you double click on a file and it finds an associated extension and it opens that file. And these do not work that way at all, because the Jupyter Notebook depends on a server running in the background. So you're starting that server on your computer. Thankfully, the people that developed the Jupyter Notebook have thought a lot about the security of this. And so by default, only your local computer can see that server, so someone can't access that server from outside your computer. But you've got to start the server first. So on Windows, I think the best way to do all of this is to install Anaconda. And so the Anaconda Navigator is something that you would open from your Windows Start menu, and then in there is an option to start the Jupyter Notebook server. If you're on Mac, Linux, Crostini, whatever, you should hopefully be able to just type Jupyter-Notebook into a terminal, and it should start the server. Once that happens, you would go to localhost:8888, and it might ask you for a password. They have tried to increase the security of these a little bit, and so there might be some extra steps you got to take the very first time you access your Jupyter Notebook server. Sometimes that means there's like a security key or something that they've printed into a window that's visible on your screen. But once that happens, you're into this tree. And now these are files and folders that I can browse. And then by clicking on them, I can, for example, go to a Jupyter Notebook file, and then that .ipynb file will open up and allow me to do the kind of things I'm going to show you in this video. So start the server and go to localhost:8888, and then you've got to remember where you saved the file that you want to open, and then browse to that and open that file. Okay, next, Jupyter Notebooks are organized into cells. So each of these things is a cell, and each cell contains some kind of either Python code. I mean, technically they are using them for other languages. For my purposes, we're going to assume that it's Python code. So the cell can contain Python code or Markdown cells. So this is Markdown. I'll talk about that in just a second. There's also something called a raw cell that I don't use very much, and I'm not going to expect my students to know how to use. So we're just going to gloss over that for now. Each cell has to have one type, so you're not allowed to mix Markdown and Python. Those have to be in separate cells, for example. Markdown is a super powerful yet simple language. If I go into here. So for example, 2 pound signs says this is an HTML level 2 header, whereas this one is a level 1 header, which for my purposes just means bigger, bold text for headings as opposed to subheadings. There's a ways to make hyperlinks, those kind of things. And so you can go to something like here and learn about different aspects of the Markdown syntax, and it doesn't take too long to get that done. Like I said, the other thing that I love about it is the ability to blend in equations. So if I use a single $sign at the start and end of some kind of mathematical symbol, then I'm putting an equation in line with my sentence. And if I use $2 signs before and after something, then I'm specifying an equation that I want centered. And this is based on LaTeX, which is a really, at this point, kind of old mathematical markup language developed by mathematicians and physicists, and then taken, others have grabbed onto it too. I used it to write my master's and PhD thesis. It just does a really good job of letting you write really well formatted math. So if you learn Markdown and learn a little bit about LaTeX equations, you can do some really nice things with your Jupyter notebooks. Okay, next thing that can cause a little bit of confusion is that if I just come in here and type some code, every time I hit enter, it just gives me a new line. It doesn't seem to do anything. That turns out to be really powerful because we don't want each cell to be limited to one line of Python code. That would get a little bit clunky. But when you actually want the code to execute, you got to hit ShiftEnter. Also note that by default it does not echo anything. That is partially just Python being kind to your semicolon key, if you're used to other languages where you have to suppress the output. But a lot of times we don't really want to look at the output of every line of code. That gets a little bit confusing. But if I specifically do want to look at the output, one option is just to come down here and type the variable that I want displayed as the last thing in the cell. And when I hit Shift Enter, that will be displayed. Another thing you're probably picking up on, so this, with these in and out labels over here, these are Python cells. They contain Python code. And then this is a Markdown cell. And you'll notice that it has no input and no output. I don't think when you're entering it, it actually looks all that different. It's the in and out markings on Python. And then Python is also by default given a light gray background where a Markdown cell is not. So how do I do that? Well, part of that has to do with learning kind of the basic methodology of working with this thing. Their Jupyter notebooks support two modes primarily, command and edit. So if I'm in this, you see this blue background. This is command mode, and I can move around between different cells. I can also add cells above or below my current cell. I can delete cells. I can actually move cells if I wanted to up and down. That's partially what these little arrows do. So command mode, super powerful for just going, not editing the actual cell itself. That's what editing mode is for. But moving cells around, adding cells, deleting cells. So if I want to enter, so also, if I've got a blue border, I'm in command mode. If I've got a green border, I'm in edit mode. To enter command mode, I use my escape key. To enter edit mode, I just type the enter or return on a cell that's currently highlighted. So that's how I toggle between them. And then once I'm in command mode, I can use just the letter A to add a cell above the current one. I can use the letter B to add a cell below. If you type DD, the letter D twice, you delete the current cell. And then, like I said, sometimes I want to convert a cell from Python to Markdown or vice versa. So I'm here, I'm in green, so that means I'm in edit mode. I hit escape, and then I hit the letter M, and then I hit enter. And now I'm in a Markdown cell. I don't know, just make making something up. And then if I were to come in here and hit escape and the letter Y, this is now Python, and it's converted any markdowns to actual Python comments like that. And then this is now invalid and would give me some kind of error if I executed it. So I'm going to go back to command mode, hit DD, and make that go away. So these are your most common. I need to switch from Markdown to Python or vice versa. I want to delete a cell. I want to add a cell above or below. So be aware of those things. Remember that you can't double click. Learn to think in terms of cells. Know that you can't mix Python and Markdown in the same cell. So you got to have a Markdown cell above or below a Python cell, whatever. And like I said, if you take the time to learn some LaTeX, you can do some really nicely formatted documents with Python and math all flowing together. And don't forget the need to do the ShiftEnter. Hopefully that helps you get started. Good luck.